Welcome to the final installment of the distance class videos. This one is going to cover practice areas and transactional materials. I've got tabs open with all three of the services that you have access to as a law student because each one of them has both practice areas and transactional materials that I think are really valuable. So I want you to see at least a small slice of all three. First, we're starting with Westlaw, and I want you to look at the tab that says Practice Areas. We're going to focus on intellectual property here because that's an area that all three of these have really nice practice area selections in. So I'm going to click on intellectual property law. And what you get here is part blog, part primary source, part practical resource, part transactional material, and all really good information. Alright, so you have news and information, you have some intellectual property analysis, and then you have a listing of all of the intellectual property resources that are available to you. Note that you have forms, sample agreements, and secondary sources. We're going to look at those kinds of things in just a minute when we talk about transactional materials. On Westlaw, you can actually make this practitioner area your start page so that it's the first thing you see when you open up Westlaw. Scrolling down a little bit, I also want you to take a look at the tools and resources. You've got information on drafting assistance, intellectual property dockets. Remember, we discussed dockets when we were talking about PACER and looking at litigation materials. And then a list of materials on your alerts. This is a basic example of what you can expect from Westlaw when you're looking at a particular practice area. Let's go to Lexis and look at the same thing. To get to practice areas on Lexis, you click the down arrow here and go to Lexis Practice Advisor. Again, we're going to choose intellectual property for this. Lexis actually has one of my very favorite intellectual property treatises. It's Nimmer on Copyright. When you open Lexis's Practice Advisor, they show you a list of topics you can select. I'm going to choose intellectual property and technology. Go ahead and X that out. And what you can see here is topical listings on the left, updates and recently browsed documents in the center, some editor's picks, and then something really nice called Law 360 News. That is updates and current events in the law related to intellectual property. Let's take a look now at something on trademark. I could look either at the basics or I could scroll down just a little bit and look at, drafting trademark licenses. That's something that could be incredibly valuable to you in any industry where trademarks are appropriate. All right, if you scroll back up, I'll just click into trademark basics. Here's the page that gets you directly to the areas of law related to trademarks. You've got a snapshot, but also forms and secondary materials. These are the kinds of resources that I'm going to point to in a minute when we talk about transactional resources. And finally, Bloomberg Law. Again, what you're going to do is look at the practice centers area, and you'll choose intellectual property. What you see should look pretty familiar by now. You get information to news and current events, you get practice resources, drafting resources, again, opinions and dockets, which I think are very valuable, and then specifically transactional resources for intellectual property. One of the things I mentioned earlier in the class that I thought Bloomberg really had the corner on the market up is their B&A law reports. These are news and current events in the area of law that you're interested in, and they are incredibly up-to-date and valuable. For my money, Bloomberg's B&A law reports are some of the best current event sources you can find. Now let's look very specifically at some transactional resources. We'll start with Bloomberg since we're already here. One of the things you see to the right is a list of document searches, existing documents you could take a look at in order to help you draft your documents. Also, clause descriptions. When you draft a contract, a license, or any other transactional document, there will be a number of types of clauses you can choose from to add or delete from your document. It's fantastic to have access to a whole list of clauses that you can choose the best that represent your client's interests. You'll also find that there are a number of books and treatises on all three of these services that offer great commentary and documents for transactional resources. I could either click on Books and Treatises here under Intellectual Property or go over to Transactional Law and choose Transactional Resources. Here I can actually look at a wide array of issues and look specifically for the kind of document I want. Let's look now for an employment agreement that includes both clauses on confidentiality and covenants not to compete. I can get some fantastic information from the confidentiality clause descriptions, or I could look from an entire sample form. Let's look at the Bloomberg B&A sample forms. Under intellectual property, there's a little bit of information here that looks like it might be useful. An employment agreement containing confidentiality and non-competition provision. If you don't already have such a form to work from, this will save you an amazing amount of time and energy by giving you a worksheet that lets you find out exactly what your client needs from their employees and help you identify those for the document. Now let's go back to Lexis and explore some transactional materials. Let's see if we can identify any forms related to employment for trade secrets here on this page. I'm going to use my favorite shortcut, Control F, and I'm going to find employment. I see that there's IP in employment and third-party agreements, and right underneath, confidentiality agreements. The very first form listed is exactly what we're looking for. It's a unilateral confidentiality agreement with an employee, basically giving the employee instructions as to what they are and are not to reveal to others. Let's do the same thing on Westlaw. We can start by looking at the forms that are available in intellectual property. Rather than narrowing it down any further, I'm just going to search all of the IP forms. So employment, confidentiality. I'm going to put in trade secret. The second result looks really on point, though I notice it's from a California treatise. I might take a look at this and then see how it squares with New York law. Alternatively, I might go back and look at forms that are only applicable to the state of New York to see if there's a similar form there. In this brief video, I've only shown you a few approaches to finding practice-related materials and transactional materials on Westlaw, Lexis, and Bloomberg. You'll get a little more practice with some of the other methods in the exercise I provide later. It's now time to turn to your exercise.